So Boston Pride is shutting down amid a lack of inclusion, and it comes as at a time where there's criticism. So this is a really short article. I'm going to go through the article. You see this flag, and so this right here is like I'll say it's an umbrella symbol or umbrella term, LGBTQ. And so this is by Oriana Gonzalez. Boston Pride announced that it will be shutting down after 50 years amid calls for change from members of the LGBTQ community who accused it of excluding people of color and transgender people. So, why it matters? It now is unclear who will organize the Boston Pride Parade, which was rescheduled from June to October this year due to the pandemic. So, the advocacy group called Mass Equality told Associated Press that while the disillusion is a loss for the LGBT community or LGBTQ community, they expect that a new organization will take over to organize the parade. And so, what they're saying is clear to us that our community needs and wants change without the involvement of Boston Pride. So, we have heard the concerns of the QTBIPOC community and others, and we care too much to stand in the way, the organization said in a statement. So it's worth noting the group's executive director announced her resignation in June as criticism over a lack of inclusion increased. And so this is in AP reports. So nearly 1,000 people had gathered in June for the second annual march and vigil for Black Trans Lives, organized by the organization Trans Resistance. Attendees said at the time they did not feel supported by Boston Pride, calling them trans exclusionary. And so this is a new, well, it isn't a new term, but it's a new term in terms of people who haven't heard it. And so I also heard a term where it was called rainbow capitalism. And I thought that was interesting because a lot of times when you hear about the gay community and pride events, you'll see all of these commercials, you'll see Target, you'll see a lot of stores, and maybe, there'll be retail companies that will jump on the bandwagon. They'll sell like shirts, clothes, ties, maybe shoes, products, posters, whatever, you name it, that promote the Pride Month. And you would think, oh, this is great. They're trying to be inclusive. But a lot of times then you read these stories that they aren't really that inclusive. They just are wanting the gay money and the gay consumership, but they are not really as inclusive as you would think they are. They just are jumping on the bandwagon for the profits off of this community. And so you'll also see there's social divides within the community. So LGBTQ is an umbrella term. This flag is just yet but one flag. There are other flags that symbolize some of the other letters, such as the Q, T, B, I, P, O, C, which a lot of people are unaware of, LGBT, Q. And so here they're talking about people of color not being represented. And I believe it because even within the Black community, we still have issues with people who are in the gay community. Some of us do, and some of us are learning, and some of us are growing, and we're, trying to figure things out. And a lot of times we're still fighting for just being included as a person of color, just in general, without you know what your sexual preference is. And so we have issues just within just being black, so I believe that is has something to do with most of that. But also you have gender issues in this community as well. So like they said, there is trans exclusionary, and there's also issues where, for example, and this is real, this is true, that here in LA County, in LA in particular, I believe it was back in the 80s, maybe before, maybe the early 80s to the 90s, there was a time they had more clubs that were representative of people of color in the gay community, even though it wasn't as like how you see now where people are trying to use this thing of inclusion to try to be more, as they say, open. um, you have to really study a lot of this. I'm very observant and try to study all of these things because a lot of times people are unaware that even in the gay communities, not everybody's all on one page, or they're not all within unity. These are umbrella terms, and they just kind of sweep everybody under that umbrella. And so what I've noticed is, there's socio-economic divide in the gay community. You'll have rich, famous people that are represented in this community, and they're always the spokesperson that you see on the news, or on TV, or on the interviews talking about gay issues. And a lot of times it's never really people of color, not as often. And if it is, it's always people that people are always well noted, and they're well represented because of money. That's basically what it's. So there's that divide. You also see there's a gender issue as well. A lot of times, like in the early 80s and early 90s, there used to be a club that was called the Catch One, I believe. It was located off of Pico in LA, and there was this lady named Jules. I can't say all the rest of her name because I have to go back in the memory bank to try to figure all that out. But she was an African American lesbian woman who owned a club and ran a club, and it catered to people of color, and a lot of people would frequent that club. And they would have different nights, nights for the drag night. They would have nights for where it would be mostly lesbian women. And I'm sure some of the famous ones that maybe if they come across a video or they hear about this, they're full aware of what went on because they were frequenting these clubs. That's where some of the rumors, what were once rumors, now you see they weren't rumors, like the Brat. I heard criticism about her that she could have been representative of the lesbian black community, and she didn't do that. And she expressed her real reason that she really didn't feel like she would be represented the right way, but she had a platform. She was a strong music artist in that time, her time. And so I guess it wasn't her time to come out. She didn't feel comfortable, and maybe she was told not to come out, not to reveal herself. But a lot of people kind of took offense to that and felt like she would have been supported by a group. Of course, that was a big step, so she figured it was better to come out now because it's more talked about. And I guess even though, you know, she was probably worried about the criticism. What I'll say on that issue is that I noticed that here in LA County, everywhere you go, there are places that represent the gay community. They have a city, they have a street, and maybe they have a little town. Here is like West Hollywood, and they give it a short name called WeHo, and then there's North Hollywood, and it's usually West Hollywood, and then there's Santa Monica. All up and down certain parts of Santa Monica, there are gay clubs or LGBTQ type of clubs, but a lot of times, even in those communities, it's people that are white, people that are more well off financially. they're wealthy, or they're famous and they frequent those areas, and there's not as much representation of people of color, unless maybe you have the money or you're with somebody that has some money. Um, but a lot of times, just people who are not wealthy and they may be in this community are not feeling it is included. And also, like you hear at the bottom of this article, it said trans exclusionary. So there was something that happened in the Olympics where they were ex- there's been exclusion of the trans athletes that are of color, and then there's been exclusion of trans athletes because of the issue around hormones. And a lot of times people don't read about all of those things to find out about that. So that's a whole nother story or topic in and of itself. But that there's been exclusion issues, there's been a lot of laws, there's been a lot of biases. There's been a lot of stereotyping. There's been a lot of criticism of over people of color that are in gay communities. There's been social divides in these communities, and there's still not enough information of learning for people to actually understand more about what this all involves and why people are discriminated the way they are. There's also all these laws. I mean, it's like you take 5 steps forward and only to get 20 steps pushed back. And so it's sad, but it happens. Sometimes we don't accept our own people from our background, racial background, people of color, not accepting other people of color that are in these communities. We sort of know that the person is gay, but we don't want to know about it. We know who you are, but we don't want to hear about it. We don't want to see it or accept it. And so that's another issue also, that people sometimes don't want to express. And so that's sad, but it happens, I'm sure, not just in the black community, but it also happens with other communities as well. But I thought this article was interesting. When you see flags like this and you see pride parade, it's always to look like everybody's in on one accord, but it isn't. It's a lot different than what people think it is. You'll see videos on YouTube, people that always seem like everything is happy and funny. And a lot of those people come from a different background, maybe a different culture, and maybe they have a different support system, and maybe an economic system might be a little different too. So they feel like everything is on the upside when it really isn't always for people that aren't in the same um, socioeconomic status. Maybe they're not famous. And so you see how long it took some of our black females that are gay to come out and say who they were and what they do, how they carry themselves, how they don't really speak out for the rest of everyone. They just, years, maybe decades later, they come out and say what people always knew. And so they feel that's just good enough right there. And all of a sudden they have a reality show. And here you got these problems right here. So I'm just saying, you know, sometimes we don't evaluate ourselves. So when you have a platform, you have an audience, what is this going to be about? And so is this going to be about so that people can learn to accept you, accept that you just normal people, or are you going to be somebody that's going to put a bridge in the gap of all of these stereotypes and try to speak out on behalf of people that you supposedly represent? And so we don't have enough of that. And so I'm just thinking that even just being as black people, we don't have enough sometimes positive representations, sometimes gender wise. Women are put down, as the angry black woman. And so yeah, so anyway, I'm gonna let this video go, but I thought this was an interesting article, especially when I heard about the term rainbow capitalism that was brought up. Because I noticed in Target, when I was just shopping in Target, I saw where they had like a section just designated for people that are in the gay community. And I said, well, you can sell the products. And I said, but I wonder, do you really support this community? You support the money. You want gay money, but you don't really want gay folks. So, and so that's what I'm seeing, I'm learning myself, knowing that a lot of places they kind of just roll with this. They jump on the bandwagon. They want your money. Hey, it's familiar. It's just like, here you got, before long they won't be doing, they probably do that for the Juneteenth. They'll have products sold specifically designated for that month. And but you'll hear all these stories about how racism just is thriving. And so it's they're doing what they do. The people that are culture vultures and capitalistic monsters. So capitalism monsters. So it's nothing new under the sun. But having said that, I'm gonna let this video go. We need more representation of people other than just putting them and sweeping them under an umbrella term. And more learning needs to happen. And people need to be able to look at the history of, like lesbian black women of color and black males that were freedom fighters of color. James Baldwin, Ma Rainey, that movie, um, Bessie Smith, you know, uh, there's a lot of documentaries that are on Netflix as well that are very teachable, that go through some of the uh, politics of what people that live in these communities have to face on a daily. And so it's easy to look at somebody that's famous and maybe they financially stable and celebrate something like this umbrella term, but then when you don't have a lot of knowledge about who people really are and what they go through, that's when, the ignorance kind of creeps in, and that's how people are discriminated against. So, having said that, I'm going to let this video go. It's worth learning about. I think it's interesting, and there's a history with the gay community, not just the Stonewall either. Um, and so, thanks for listening.